Welcome to the ninth round of the Resilience Dialogues. My name is Kathleen Koch. I'm a former longtime CNN correspondent and author, and I am just so very thrilled to be invited back here to join you again. This is my second time moderating a Resilience Dialogue. I also moderated one in October, and I am just really excited to be here because I think after the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, I think that we can say that resilience is really on a roll. I mean, how many of you were able to attend, just out of curiosity? I would love to see, could we give a round of applause to the people who were involved and the long and hard hours that they put in, because it was just really remarkable, really amazing. You know, I think that this discussion this evening is just, it couldn't be timelier, and for ever so many reasons, and not just because of Sendai. Obviously, during this Sendai conference, places around the world were suffering disasters. Of Vanuatu is still struggling right now to recover from Cyclone Pam, Micronesia, Typhoon Maisak. And then also, if you will recall, 2015 is the 20th anniversary of the very deadly Kobe earthquake. It's also the 10th anniversary here in the United States of the worst natural disaster that we've ever suffered, and that's, of course, Hurricane Katrina on the Gulf Coast. And that is what got me very passionate about disaster risk reduction. That's really why I am here with you this evening, because it made it personal for me. I'm sure many of you, maybe that's what launched your interest in resilience and disaster risk reduction, was going through something where, in my case, Hurricane Katrina destroyed my hometown. The house that I had grown up in. I know 3 people who died within a half mile of my home. And so that's why I am so excited about Sendai, about what was accomplished there, and how I think they really moved the ball forward by making one of our really important goals, helping people understand the disaster risks that they face, and that something can be done about them, that we can prevent, that we can prepare, reduce them, and that we can, after these events occur, we can build back better in a more resilient way. And also that it is so important that no nation, no matter how small, be left behind. Well, right now, I would like to introduce Laurence Toubiana to frame our discussion. And of course, the topic this evening is the road to Addis, financing development in the post-2015 world. Laurence is the special representative of the French Minister of Foreign Affairs for the 2015 Paris Climate Conference and is French ambassador for climate negotiations. Laurence? Bienvenue. Almost a disaster.
Okay, almost a disaster. Avoided. Thank you to offer this extraordinary opportunity to, in a way, connect the discussion that are taking place on resilience with the discussion that are taking place for climate change. But first, I want to apologize because the ministry, the State Secretary for International Cooperation, should have been in front of you presenting the topic. She is very keen at developing, and she could not make it. So I will try to replace her, and really to first tell you how extraordinary this period is. And I was not, unfortunately, in Sendai. There were many French ministers in Sendai, so a lot of commitment from all of them. I think we had 3 plus the Minister of Defense, but he was not in Sendai. So we have a huge commitment on the French government side. And what is really fascinating is to see how much the discussion taking place this year cannot ignore one another. In Sendai, and a lot of discussion were connected to climate change, even if the tradition, in a way, of discussion in Sendai was not climate, was really about extreme events and catastrophes management, risk preventions. And progressively, climate has come in the discussion now for a number of years, but in particular, of course, in this meeting, and with the new actors who are taking place in the climate scene, insurance, investors, climate risk was in a way connected to the Sendai process. And then we'll have now in 2 months' time or 3 months' time, a discussion on the financing of sustainable development, and then SDGs in September, and Paris. And each time, everyone open a discussion is connecting in an easy and difficult way. It's not easy because processes are different. Philosophies and there is past dependencies of all the process, of course, are here, but at the same time, nobody can ignore the integrated element of the problems we are dealing with. And that, I think, is absolutely important. And so important that I think that's why the discussion, in my view, is moving from traditional viewpoints to something much more interesting, much more provocative, much more transformational. Let's take adaptation, which was, of course, behind the idea of Sendai, of vulnerability, resilience, is about, of course, in a way, what we call adaptation in our language on climate. And I'm feeling that on adaptation, we are now breaking ground. Until now, adaptation was a discussion of countries suffering from climate change, asking countries that are the cause of the climate change because of very high level of emissions to compensate what they are suffering. So the discussion was rather rhetorical, financial, when more concrete, but nothing really on what can we do, what we have to do, what can we do for adaptation in our own countries. And in Lima, something broke the ground because countries wanted, and it was a vast majority of developing countries in particular, to have in the INDC adaptation as an important part of their contribution to this movement, to this bottom-up approach, which place every country in the capacity to design what will be its future, its development plans, its investment plan for climate, and this include adaptation now. There was a lot of resistance from the developed countries side, I must say. But finally, the developing countries won, and I think it's very, very important. Why? Because from this financial or political, ideological discussion, we are entering in new grounds where we are talking about what is it about to talk and to work together on adaptation. And we now have a discussion which is on the political terms. We have to find what does means having political parity between mitigation in the Agreement of Paris and adaptation, and at the same time, what we achieve in the sort of mitigation part of the discussion on climate, which is what are finally the drivers of the mission and what are the policies to respond to this. It's the same that will just progressively will happen in adaptation. And now we are going to have really down to the earth questions, which is adaptation is about food policies, agriculture, soil fertility management, resilient infrastructure, and the rest. And I think we are then making enormous progress. On one side, to recognize that it is now a very important dimension of the global economy because climate change is happening. And on the second aspect, we have to deal concretely to these evolutions. So we are going to be more concrete, and that's good. And resilience, in this resilience dialogue, I think that, of course, the value of having, doing, and being understanding what are the main policies, the main action, the main technology, the main sectors that can respond to the challenge. Of course, in most of the case, and because the countries now commit to present strong adaptation plans, clear ones, I think that will change the picture of what the resilience discussion is. On one side, we understand that many countries are really trying to measure what is really their vulnerability, and we need to. It's not only poverty dimension, it's a vulnerability dimension, and posing new questions about the category of countries that are extremely vulnerable, and we have as a solidarity of the international community to respond to this extreme vulnerability. And at the same time, there is a whole set of new policies Concretely, I think we see now cities, we see rural territories being really trying to understand what is happening and how they can address. It's a connection many times between poverty alleviation and increasing resilience. At the same time, the mobilization of local knowledge as well as a global knowledge is really important in this resilience context. So one is the territories, and many concrete actors are defining what is their policies to be resilient. We saw on the trying to bring something to Sendai, and understanding that we have, as a French presidency, in a way, want to have in the agreement a strong dimension on adaptation and resilience we are working at, including a good definition of what could be a global goal for adaptation, which is, and this political parity, understanding that we will ask countries in the agreement to present their adaptation plan. So that's our first pillar of the Paris outcome, where adaptation will come in. And of course, in the INDCs themselves, this contribution of countries, we'll see, and we are seeing more and more countries coming with these plans. Then we can begin to discuss concrete policies. And then that's why we have to think about what is an adaptation part of the finance package we want to present for Paris. And we have to, recognizing that's not the same logic, not the same business model, not the same articulation between private and public funding than for mitigation, but there is a number of cases where there is really business model possible, there are profitable activities. It's a matter of going down to the earth again. So on the financial package, on the very general commitment that, for example, the Green Climate Fund has to develop, to take 50% of its spending to adaptation. Now, what does it mean in terms of the different projects, of the different mechanisms? So adaptation in finance will be a key discussion for us in Paris. And of course, good ideas are welcome. That's why we are discussing extremely intensively with the insurance sector. That's why I think, and it's good to see that in the G7 we see ideas emerging to really try to elaborate and to increase insurance system to get more access for people to insurance. So that our positive response to this very much integration of adaptation in the climate regime. And that's, I think, very good. But we add another dimension to that, which in a way it's two issues. One is to get an agreement, we have to pay special attention to the one who are not the more vocal or the more powerful, but that are the more affected. Normally at the end of the day, at the last minute of the negotiation, international negotiation, even if, and you know that's a very classical, the more affected countries, even if many big countries are hiding behind them, at the end of the day, nobody would pay so much attention to them. So a big issue about for the sort of, or hopefully, an honest brokers at the presidency, the French presidency has to be, together with our Peruvian colleagues, is to make sure that these countries specifically recognize that they got something out of the agreement when by normal standards of bargaining they would be dropped down at the end of the day. That's why we have beforehand, before this last night of negotiation, to understand what could be a specific package for vulnerable countries, for the small islands, and for many affected, very vulnerable countries. That's why we need an understanding of vulnerability. And additionally, because this is about moving the real economy, this agreement, it's not about only a legal text. It's not about even, it's about us, how ambitious it is, trying to begin to reorient the financial system. But we need to have really the deployment in the real economy of actions to make government more confident that they can deliver more, to make the financial system in a way responding to something which is going on. The financial system is not inventing projects, it's responding to projects. That's why we need, in what we call our fourth pillar of the Paris outcome, really a solution agenda. And in this solution agenda, which mainly appears like an agenda of solution for mitigation, we have to have strong elements for adaptation and resilience. That's why in Sendai, I think Laurent Fabius launched the idea of having an early warning system for extreme events that is widely shared and that every small country can have access to information and to the management of this information. And I know World Bank is doing a great job. Some countries are doing a great job too. So it's a matter of coordination and really bridging information failure. But we need to, I think, understand what could be this particular package for vulnerable countries that can enhance their resilience capacity. We see already areas, let's talk soil fertility, for example, the capacity of restoring degraded lands, of increasing the productivity of land by good agricultural practice, water management, and I could do a long list, but we need this solution. Whatever they are very high, skyrocketing, or rocket science technology, or sometimes very sort of sound agricultural practices. But we need to have all this implemented by local authorities, by private sector, to show and demonstrate to government that they don't have to really write adaptation plans that stay on a shelf, but they can implement it actively. So, of course, we have many, many things to do before Paris. I think we have to prepare this particular package in terms of finance and probably information. We have to understand what could be the good elements to respond to this catastrophe management. But at the same time, we had to understand that to make the link more and more about this combination on low carbon economy and resilient economy, and that is converging pathways. On that aspect, it will be very important to have in Addis Ababa and then in September the notion that we are advancing on an agenda that really create conditions for resilient economy because they are sustainable on a whole range, from social aspect to environmental aspect, as well from economical aspect. So that's why I'm very happy to be here, to listen and to learn much more than whatever I can bring you, but just to let you know that adaptation and resilience would be a very strong part of the Paris package in December. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurence. And a bit of housekeeping before we go any further. I would love to welcome our audience that is watching us on live stream, and also let everyone watching there and here know that we will take your questions if you tweet them to us, and that is at #resilience_dialogue. And you can also email your questions to resilience_dialogue@gmail.com. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage our wonderful panelists. First, Neven Mimica is the European Union's Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development. That is a position that he assumed last year, and prior to that, he was the Commissioner for Consumer Policy. Next, Mahmoud Ahmed is Senior Secretary of the Ministry of Finance of Bangladesh. He assumed the position in July 2014 and has been serving the government of Bangladesh for the last 30 years. Rachel Kite is the World Bank Group Vice President and Special Envoy for Climate Change, where she oversees work on climate change adaptation and mitigation and climate finance. The Honorable Vance Amory is Senior Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis and has also served as Premier of Nevis since 2013, and if you've ever flown into his country, his name might be familiar. You see, the main airport is named after him. So I think that's a first for a guest on our Resilience Dialogues. And finally, Kiyoshi Kodera is Vice President of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA. And that is an independent agency that coordinates Japan's official development assistance, focusing on supporting economic and social growth in developing countries. So thank you, panelists, and I will join you. I would like to Mic on, can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. It's on? Oh, hear me now, wonderful. So Rachel, when I was watching you in Sendai, are we on too? Yeah. We're good. I saw a fire in your eyes. I saw a new passion. What has changed? I'm just wondering, are you more optimistic? Is the gospel of resilience being heard?
Yep, needs to be heard.
It was
Exactly.
Is this working? Me? Oh, it's just time. Okay. Well, first of all, Kathleen, I just want to thank for those of you who were here. Okay. But for those of you who were here 6 months ago, I was sitting closer to the trees, and one of the trees fell on me. So, first of all, I am resilient. And secondly, they put me in the middle this year. So. We're safe. Okay, so, no, it was very interesting at Sendai because the watchword, I mean, you heard delegation after delegation, UN agency after UN agency, one after the other, really talking about, it's annoying, so I don't know whether to shout or not shout, but talking about, so talking about, if it's not resilient, it's not development. And I think that's actually part of the challenge for this year, because we're here talking a lot about the financing of the development agenda that we're all about to subscribe to in September. And it's not about having sort of stovepipe. You've got an agricultural set of goals, you've got goals for and then there's a resilience, there's a goal on resilience. It's about the fact that that we have to, throughout all of the development we plan for, and for all the development that we will be investing in, ensuring that it is actually enhancing the resilience of countries, of communities, of individuals, and understanding how that gets financed. So, this afternoon we sit down with the insurance industry and really talk about all the ways in which we can mobilise the expertise as well as the capital of the insurance industry to make sure that we are making development resilient. And of course there's a whole climate angle on this as well, which is that all of the development that takes place now is already taking place in a world shaped by climate change. And that will be more and more profoundly the case over the next 20 years. The fire. I mean, I think I was just fed up, actually. But the real issue for me was this was like the third or fourth conference in 3 years, where a natural disaster took place while we were there. And yeah, it's an exclamation point. And I think if for me anyway, I mean, the reason you work in development is to serve your clients. And our clients were right there, and they didn't know what they were going home to. And square brackets and negotiating text, and at some point you have to stand back and think that this is about people, not about square brackets, and remind yourself why you're in the business. So if we're really going to, if the economics tell us that we need to make development resilient, otherwise it won't be development and it won't be affordable, then, and we've got years and years and years of evidence of that, and every conference we collect more evidence, then the conversation is, who's going to move first? Who's going to actually start investing more in resilience and less in relief? Who's going to start really, banging on the table a little bit in a little bit more of a different way than perhaps is the case at the moment? And as Laurent said, who's going to get heard in the negotiations?
When we talk about funding disaster risk reduction, it's not just quantity, but it's quality. That's important. Talk to me about, excuse me, about that, making it more efficient and more effective.
Thank you. But first of all, I really like to thank you, all of you who come to Sendai. It was a really great, successful, and meaningful meeting. And some 6,500 outside Japan visitor came, and very serious discussion. And I was also have to attend the panel on the economic aspect of the disaster risk reduction. And that was a very important topic, particularly in the audience. You have, many of you relates to the international organization, finance organization, and the finance ministry. And Japan, unfortunately, is a disaster-prone country. And our archipelago is sitting on the triple junction of the tectonic plates, and also the major corridor of the typhoon. So even the post-war period from the late 40s and 50s and 60s, when our per capita income was less than 5,000, 5 to 8% of the national budget was injected for disaster risk management. Post-disaster investment, build back better. And so we have lots of experience. But important thing is that have finance minister understand the severity and the magnitude of economic loss, and how to prepare for that. We discussed many points. How to estimate economic loss and the impact, and what to do with the cost-benefit analysis, and ex-ante economic impact assessment, and the budgetary allocation. Japan spent 5 to 8% all through from the 60s to right now, and but I found two interesting movements among the finance ministers. First is Seychelles, Madagascar, Mauritius, West Indian Ocean finance ministry get together and look at their public expenditure through disaster risk reduction marker. And the interesting conclusion was almost 6% of their entire budget was devoted for disaster risk reduction. Another movement from Latin America, 11 to 13 Latin American countries, finance ministers signed up for creating a network in dealing with ex-ante investment. So how to place the ex-ante pre-investment for disaster risk reduction in their very tight national budget. So the new movement is coming out, and then we made an announcement of the 4 billion. But money is not the matter. And another aspect of the new Sendai Corporation initiative is how to raise the quality of the officials concerned. And we are aiming at training closely to the 40,000 people globally for the next 4 years. One example,
that's remarkable.
Yeah. One example is that we chose Chile for the hub for the training for the Latin American countries, 2,000 officials for the next 5 years. Small island Pacific countries. In Fiji, we have a new training facility, 500 people from the Pacific Islands for the next 3 years. So we need to expand this program to other continents. But we are really committed, and this is, in a sense, the prelude for the Addis.
Arigatou gozaimashita for everything that your country is doing. Thank you so much. Nevin, I'd like to, you were saying, what about other countries? What about other areas? Let's jump to Europe. How does your institution integrate the concept of resilience into its operations?
Good question, and thank you for the opportunity to continue this resilience debate today. Yes, indeed, Sendai has drawn a very clear policy line, but also very clear action lines when it comes to disaster risks reduction. And Sendai has confirmed that disaster risk reduction is a part or inseparable part of the overall resilience, and then also inseparable part of the overall development efforts. So in that context, we in the European Union have also focused our responses, our development or external action responses, in order to make them more comprehensive, to make them more rounded up in terms of not working into isolated vertical silo approach where one commissioner would be in charge of let us say, security and foreign policy responses, the other one for humanitarian relief, and the third one for development projects. We try from the very beginning to avoid the question where the development comes before security or after the security response, or to avoid the question what comes first, development as a precondition for in order to diminish the humanitarian relief, or afterwards. We actually forged a new answer to that question by merging European external action into one package, I would say, where we try to have development, humanitarian assistance, security, resilience, disaster risk as a parallel and comprehensive and coherent policies and actions. This is how our development agenda would look like from now on, or from few years ago on, and this will be very visible also in our positions, in our negotiating positions officially, but also in our working and operational positions when it comes to a new sustainable development agenda in a row from Sendai, Addis Ababa, New York, and Paris. Therefore, increasing our impact in the development arena will be based on such a coordinated approach, because after all, European Union is by far the biggest official development assistance provider, and we would like not only to be the biggest, the largest, more than a half of a global ODA by 58 billion euros every year from European Union and member states, but we would like to be not only the largest donor or contributor to assistance, we would like to be the best donor, the most efficient donor, and we could be the best efficient donor only if we have this integrated and keep this integrated approach to development and resilience.
Thank you, Nevin. Vance, I'd like to talk to you. Your country in particular, you face so many natural hazards, earthquakes, hurricanes, even volcanic eruptions, mudslides, the list goes on. Talk to me how difficult it is for small island developing nations to really integrate, resilience in your budgets to finance it. And are you more or less optimistic after what you saw in Sendai that you're going to get the help you need?
Thank you very much for having me as part of this panel, and also thank you, those of you who have come to listen to this very important discussion. And I think small island states, and the Caribbean especially, and I want to broaden my comments from St. Kitts and Nevis to the region of the Caribbean, because we are all, as it were, in the same boat. I know those countries which are further south, like Barbados is east, Trinidad, and so on, they do not see themselves as part of the hurricane belt. But we have seen in the last 10 maybe 20 years, change in the pattern of hurricanes. And we therefore still believe that the entire Caribbean archipelago is susceptible to hurricanes. So our plan really has to include in all of our planning, all of the Caribbean islands and nations must see themselves as being susceptible to natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, and so on. One of the challenges we have, or perhaps the largest challenge, is because of the small size of our budgets, it is difficult to earmark large amounts for disaster preparedness. What we have done, however, is we have embarked on a plan of serious training and education of our people in respect of what do they do in the event that there is a threat of a hurricane, how do they respond during the occurrence, and then what do we do after the event.
So
I
is
think that for us is part of our National Emergency Management Plan. And it is as much as we could do to create a budget through the development of our human resource rather than having a sinking fund to provide for an emergency. And this, I think, would be the pattern throughout the Caribbean. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we've had, since 1995, a series of very devastating earthquakes. 95, we had Luis,
hurricanes.
then hurricanes, we had Hurricane Marilyn, and then in 1998, we had one of the largest and most devastating Hurricane George, which created 140% of GDP destruction in St. Kitts and Nevis, and about 80% of the housing structure, infrastructure was damaged or destroyed. And always, whenever there is an occurrence of a natural disaster, hurricane especially, we find that we would have made significant strides in the rebuilding process. And we were at those early stages a little remiss in taking the corrective measures to be resilient.
So
But
you didn't build back better.
We didn't build back as strong as we ought to have done. But since 1998, we have introduced some very strict building codes to ensure that construction of new residences and new buildings of whatever sort, that they meet a standard which could withstand, we're looking at a category 4. I think anything above that, I don't know what could withstand the category 5 hurricane. So our plan is really to use the experiences that we've had to provide resilience in terms of our reconstruction plans, to look at the way our people are trained and prepared to respond. And government itself, we are the main managers of that process. But we have, by and large, enlisted the private sector. Whenever we have an event, the private sector are very willing to participate in the preparatory arrangements, but also in the recovery arrangements which transpire.
Thank you, Vance. I want to give Mahfoud a chance to speak because your country really has such a long history of disasters, of facing them. And in the past, you and I were discussing upstairs how often the casualties, the deaths were so high. But you were telling me how Bangladesh has made great strides in resilience, in preparation. Talk to me about the resilience lessons that you think the rest of the world can learn from your country.
Thank you very much for inviting me here and giving me scope to interact with you and share my experience with all of you present here. This is true that Bangladesh is located in a very vulnerable areas and disaster-prone areas, and is facing disaster from since inception. And you know that resilience to natural disaster which is caused by climatic changes, must have a interface with the socio-economic development of the country. And over the last few years or few decades, Bangladesh has made a remarkable progress in both economic area and social areas, And Bangladesh government has managed to keep some resources for taking some adaptation programs so that peoples who are severely affected by the disaster problem can be supported by various ways. And from the very beginning, Bangladesh is working with the international development partners also in this area and prepared nationally climate change policies and taken a systematic approach to a disaster preparedness program. And I can give you a detailed list, but since considering your time constraint, I can mention few areas where Bangladesh has worked with his own resources in his own way. Sometimes he's used the indigenous technology also to cope up with this problem. And we have first we have developed a early warning system. Before, in 1970, there was a serious type of cyclone and tidal bore in Bangladesh, where about this is before our liberation, and at that time, nearly 1 million people were died out of this disaster, and therefore Bangladesh, just after liberation, Bangladesh tried to develop the early warning system, and nowadays this system can give you idea about 1 or 2 days before if the natural calamities can happen, so that people can be removed from the coastal areas to the safe areas. And we have also developed a group of volunteers in the coastal areas. About 70 to 80,000 volunteers are there under our Red Cross or Red
And these are citizens?
Okay. And they helped people to remove their houses to the safe area. And we have developed multi-purpose cyclone shelter also in the coastal areas. There are several hundreds this type of cyclone center where people can take shelter in the crisis moment. And these shelters are also used as a school or community center in the normal time. And we have also developed technology to preserve the dry food and drinking water underground at the time of a tidal bore. People can save their food, clothing, or the drinking water, digging a hole in the soil and wrap the food and all the items, and they can, so that when the water goes away, they can dig those items and they can use it and can have
obviously
the food
countries
for
that go through
survival.
disasters like yours on a regular basis, you learn to be
indigenous
creative.
technology developed by the people of Bangladesh, and they have also prepared some hill to preserve the livestock and on the top of the hill. These are built up hills, small hills built up.
Man-made hills.
Yeah.
Just to preserve the life of the livestock.
Yeah. And Bangladesh also developed in the time of flooding, we have developed a system of mobile schools and medical centers, The peoples of this of the area where the flood is a common affair every year, at that time, the students take their lessons on boat, and people can take the treatment from mobile hospitals we have on boat. And we have developed a cultivation procedure on the vegetable cultivation on boat or floating soil at the time of flood. These are indigenously developed by the peoples of Bangladesh, and developed special crop varieties which is can be stand in the waterlogging even. And
actually, Mahmoud, I'd like to stop. I'd like Rachel to jump in and chat a little bit. Talk to me you're hearing some really interesting resilience measures. What is the World Bank doing to make sure that resilience is getting the funding that it needs globally?
Well, I think in countries which are extraordinarily disaster prone, Bangladesh, the small islands of the Caribbean and Central America, the Pacific, Philippines, others, then I think that there's a number of things. First of all, the indigenous responses are things that then need to be taken up, and then those lessons need to be learned elsewhere, right? And so this sort of community of practice, of those who understand how to build resilience in different ways needs to be a fundamental part of how we work, and then that needs to be something that then drives investment. I think that we've spent a lot of time thinking through making sure our own development finance is not suboptimal, right? So how to make sure that when we're thinking through our mainstream development programs, we are funding in such a way that you are going to increase the adaptive capacity of communities and individuals and improve the resilience of the country. So that involves screening our development loans for disaster risk, and then engaging with our clients to make sure that we're on the same page in terms of what the risk is and how to manage that risk, mitigate that risk, avoid that risk. And then I think that we've been working on a whole range of financial tools to build the financial capacity to enhance resilience. And there, everything from catastrophe risk through to other insurance products which can help. We're now working with the German government in the run-up to the G7 to see whether or not we can help really expand access to catastrophe risk, working with the French government over how to expand access to early warning. So sort of the technologies and the financial technologies that help countries become more resilient. But here I think, one of the things that we have to improve is in our dialogue with our clients, where's the ranking priority? Because for many of ministers of finance, it's like, okay, we've got a whole range of priorities and everything's as important as everything else. And that's a difficult dialogue as it is. And then how do we have the dialogue with our clients so that little piece of fiscal space, that use of the IDA envelope or the use of this development financing for something which will enhance resilience, competing with some request for something else, how do we make the case that that's actually a top priority? So,
but isn't there a good economic argument?
There's a good economic argument, but there's very good politics around the cabinet table that says, okay, I want this, right? So, you can make the case that, if we make sure that every school building is built to code to withstand Category 4, then all of that education loans, all the education loans that you're borrowing from other development partners and all the work you're doing is going to actually do better because the kids will actually be able to continue to be educated in a building. But I already tried about it, but I think that we haven't yet got to the point where we are, really having more and more robust conversations with our clients about whether or not we're really internalizing the economics of resilience.
Kiyoshi, I wanted to talk to you about the burden of climate and disaster risk. So often it falls squarely on government shoulders, but talk to me about the need to share that burden with the private sector, with individual households. How do you get them involved in pushing resilience forward?
Good question. I think that the World Bank is taking the lead for inviting the private insurer for these kind of disaster risk management. Now, at the Sendai, finally the Japanese insurance company realized that they have to be involved. And also for the Pacific Islands, the World Bank has established a pilot program for bringing in the private insurance. And as a seed money to attract the private insurers, the Japanese government committed only 5.7 billion. And the result is that last year for Tonga, also for the Vanuatu last month, immediately paid the similar amount. And this amount is 7 times more than government premium for this scheme. And also 8 times more than government's own emergency reserve.
So this is proving to them this works. Insurance works.
It's working, but we need to be a little bit more creative to invite more insurers. Another good example is Philippines. World Bank and JICA had conducted a 1-hour seminar on central government, local government, and the stakeholder in the islands and private insurers. Who will take what kind of risk to what extent? And this is a very innovative conversation taking place in the Philippines because they've been hit so many times, and this is a kind of the national the policy goals. But this discussion among the central government and the local government and stakeholders involving private insurers are really interesting development, and they should be proud of this.
Nevin, obviously we know that disaster risk reduction, climate resilience are more important today than ever before, but still, are they both very tough sells in developing countries when they have so many competing priorities and so few resources?
I would say that overall development agenda is now getting more and more universal, and especially after New York conference, I do hope that this universal and transformative concept of the development will really prevail. In that context, we really try to engage our development cooperation in the partner countries in developing world along the lines of the national priorities that the partner countries have for themselves in their strategic development plans. So therefore our development projects, programs, concrete programs are programmed together with the national authorities in the partner countries in a way that we follow the priority sectors, the sectors of concentration that they would choose, for instance, be it health sector, agriculture, education, energy. But we, especially under the, let us call it, resilience umbrella, we try to assess whether the programs that were chosen, identified by partner countries, whether they contain this resilience component, whether they contribute to the resilience. If not, then we somehow, in a coordination with the partner countries' authorities, we add this component. We feed resilience programs into our assistance, development assistance. So from the European Union's development agenda point of view, we really would like to have each and every program to be looked at from this resilience angle. How much it contributes to the resilience, be it in agriculture. Let us have programs that do not actually are channeled towards dealing with the root causes of malnutrition or low productivity in agriculture, and not just tackling the consequences of the food security crisis. So this is a way how we could work together with the partner countries in order to upgrade their understanding and their choice when prioritizing the let's say the direction of using the scarce resources they have. We try to let's say to make it clear in our programs, but also in a policy dialogue with the partner countries, that resilience is to be and has to be a part and parcel of the development policy. So I definitely agree that if it is not resilience, it is not development. That's what we try to put into each and every program.
Vance, you spoke earlier about some of the things you're trying to do to make your country more resilient, primarily through education, because you said you just don't have the funds to do the larger projects you'd like to. But again, you didn't mention really Sendai, if you were happy with what came out of there for small island developing nations. If you could get more and do more, what would you like to do, and what can the organizations represented here help you with?
I think it's important to recognize that in the small islands we do need to protect ourselves against climate change and the effects of climate change. Our economies are driven by tourism primarily. Our tourism is driven by beaches and sun and sand. With a hurricane event, the beaches disappear, and that affects the attractiveness. One of the areas which we would like to get assistance with is coastal protection to prevent the erosion because of climate change and sea level rises, because that is a very important part of our economic activity. And we also have to look at retrofitting our community centers to make them usable in the event of a severe event. Because if we have loss of property, that is where we look after those who are vulnerable. And we need to be able to have in those centers the facility to look after our people for however long it takes us as a government, as a country, to replace and reestablish their homes for them. So there are areas in which the World Bank and the government of Japan and the European Union can assist us to ensure that were we to have an event, hurricane, earthquake, that we would be able to look after our people and make sure they're comfortable, so that they can know that there is that humanitarian aspect to develop. We also need to look at having adequate water supplies after, because it may be, and we've seen a situation where after a hurricane it's difficult to approach us by sea, it's difficult to come by air, and then our water supply needs to be adequate, because that is such an essential part of living. And one of the areas which we would like to have assistance is to build a sufficient capacity so that we can store adequate water in case we have difficulties. Because I think it is one of those areas which I think in Vanuatu we saw people saying they had no water, they had no food, and also the ability to store food. The instance of Bangladesh storing in the earth is an interesting initiative, but it's something that we must look at. How do we store adequate food supplies to satisfy our needs, just in case we are not able to have access by sea or by air for a period of time? And I think those two areas are very critical to our small islands, for our response and our resilience development in case of disasters.
Mahmoud, I'd like to go to you next, because despite all the advances that your country has made and all the knowledge you have to share with the rest of the world, you still must face some challenges in bringing resilience fully to scale in your country. What would you still like to see progress on, and that you may indeed need the help of institutions represented here?
Thank you very much. Actually, our economy is a transitional stage now. We are moving from agro-based economy to industrial economy. And if you see the GDP composition of Bangladesh at this moment, when we got liberation in 1971, 80% of our GDP was coming from agriculture sector. now agricultural's contribution is less than 17% for our GDP, and industrial contribution became is 30 to 32%, and we are getting from 50 to 52% from a service sector. You can easily understand that the main center of economic activities is concentrated in the urban areas mainly, including our capital city urban areas. We have also vulnerability in the urban areas, and therefore how we tackle the disaster in the rural areas or coastal areas, but we are not well prepared as yet for the urban areas. If any serious type of disaster happens, we don't have capacity to tackle them immediately because our city is developed in a very unplanned way, and land use pattern is also not very systematic, and we could not implement the building code what we have in case of any disaster, especially earthquake happen in Bangladesh. And that is a serious challenge for us to how to handle those kind of disaster. But still we are working in this area also. We have also developed volunteers in the urban areas, and government with its limited resources procuring some instrument and equipment to handle this situation. But still I think this in this area we'll have to do many work, and any international development partners or communities has come in this area to support us, we'll welcome that.
Thank you. Rachel, Addis in July focuses on financing development. But what do you see as the challenges that you face right now in convincing the international development community of the need to invest in resilience? And how are you going to define success in Addis?
Well, I think that what we, I don't know if there's ever an easy year, but it's a difficult time, right? We've got low interest rates and slow growth in the developed world, where the traditional source of the very precious public dollars that form overseas development assistance, and then the source of the public climate finance that is required under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that's under pressure. There will be a discussion at the Development Committee here around how to finance development, and the collective work of the multilateral development banks and the IMF is putting forward a paper which is not making suggestions. It's just a background paper that looks at where the financing for development will and can come from. And we're entering into a different era, because for many countries the source of development financing is going to be manifold, and it's going to be the improvement of tax systems domestically, improvement of tax collection, locking down illicit flows of finance. And that's not just a developing country agenda, by the way. That's a big developed country agenda as well. Then, and then, foreign direct investment, increasing the investment climate, so it's more likely that you can have robust domestic capital markets, robust domestic liquid insurance markets. And then it's how do you use this in a highly catalytic and leveraged way, this precious ODA and precious climate finance. And, depending on where you are in your journey of development, you're going to have some or all of these resources available. And then, how do we support ministries of finance and planning and the stakeholders in the country to be able to fashion through the financing of that development? And then what we're saying as the World Bank is that development needs to be sensitive to and aware of the climate challenges which will make that development more risky, and where the opportunities lie in growing the economy and developing in a greener way, and where are the incremental costs of that going to come from, and where are the incremental costs of the necessary building of the resilience now going to come from. One of the points we made in Sendai, and we'll say it here, and we'll say it on the road to Addis, and we'll say it after Addis, and we'll say it on the road to Paris, is that if we do not invest in resilience now, it's going to cost us an awful lot more down the line. It's going to cost the European, Japanese, and the United States taxpayer more in the future, because when disaster happens, the relief, the consequences of the disaster will accrue in development, relief, and humanitarian terms to those taxpayers. And if you don't have the liquid insurance markets, if you haven't invested in the resilience that you need at a domestic level, the insurer, at the end of the day, all of the costs come back to the state. So there is very clearly an incentive for developing countries to invest in their own resilience, and there's a very clear incentive for the international development community to help them invest in their resilience using all of the tools available to us. And I think that's what we're hoping, that in Addis there's a comprehensive approach, that we don't have a sort of zero-sum game analysis where we've got development finance over here and climate finance over there, and that people think that the two things go up or down in relationship to the other. There is development, sustainable development to be done. It has to be sensitive to the fact that the climate is changing all of that. And if we don't prioritize resilience now, we will lose money as well as lives, as well as opportunity over the next 20 years.
Kiyoshi, I'd like you to build on what Rachel said. I mean, your country does have such an impressive resume when it comes to managing disaster risk. Can you help us better understand the economics of resilience, how beneficial it is, and how it pays off, and how do you think you can help this inform the discussion in Addis?
Well, as I said at the outset, our country is so disaster-prone country. So the preparedness, pre-investment is already embedded in the budget operation. I give you this number. We spent 188 billion for pre-investment or Build Back Better investment. And emergency rescue budget is 400 million, only less than 1% of the pre-investment budget. So this is how we came from. And so we will continue to emphasize the importance of the ex-ante investment. At the same time, pooling of the fund for the post-disaster is also important, involving private sector. And our new ODA charter, for the first time in the past 12 years, now the catchword is inclusive, sustainable, and resilient growth.
Nevin, I'd like to go to you with one of the questions that has come online, and actually what it is, it's sort of a theme that we're seeing emerge. People are asking how to better align funding for humanitarian efforts and disaster risk management to achieve true resilience.
My point of departure when trying to answer this question would be that we really have to take care of the synergy of our funding, of our investment sources. We have resilience, we have climate change, we have development actions. I'd not like to see the situation where there are separate envelopes for development financing, climate change financing, disaster risk reduction financing, or resilience financing, because this in the end would be a zero end game. In all the European Union's efforts, we try to see how to comprehensively approach the funding issue. For instance, when it comes to climate action, the same goes to resilience as well. I can see that there should be some kind of division between the ODA and the climate financing. We can't say ODA is not for climate. There should be additional funding for climate change. Yes, ODA is partially again climate-related actions. We have in European Union a very clear commitment to channel at least 20% of our overall budget envelope to climate-related funding. But this doesn't exclude work on finding some new innovative instruments, some new innovative approach and sources for climate funding, be it from a better taxation, new taxation funds, be it a better mobilization of domestic resources. Therefore, also for resilience, I would like to see, and this is what we shall do and what we are doing, that our funding is not, let us say, divided into strict envelopes. For instance, last year European Union allocated 20% of its humanitarian funding for disaster risk reduction, and almost 2/3 of all humanitarian relief assistance included disaster risk reduction component and activity. So in that context, again, I say that there is enough room, enough good reasons to have humanitarian development and resilience funding taken as a joint comprehensive synergy building approach to fund.
Thank you. Vance, I was wondering, as we look ahead to Addis, if you remarked the same thing that I did. When you look at the situation in Vanuatu, I just felt like it's such a perfect illustration of how disaster risk reduction has to be a part of development. And I wanted to read you a quote from the President Baldwin Lonsdale after the disaster. He said, quote, "After all the development we have done for the last couple of years, and this big cyclone came and just destroyed all the infrastructure the government has built, completely destroyed." I mean, doesn't that just illustrate that these two have to go hand in hand?
I think it must. I don't know that we can separate development for economic reasons, so to create jobs without looking long term. And I think the long-term plan must be, how do we apply those development funds to ensure that whatever happens and we're able to protect and prepare against those disasters, that we can sustain any attack. I think it's one of the things which we in St. Kitts and Nevis have been doing. Yes, we have some ways to go, but because of our experience over the years, we recognize that we have to think long term. We must think and couple planning, or planning must have a component for resilience, to protect what we have invested, to protect what we have constructed against hurricanes, against earthquakes. And so I agree totally that the matter of building with resilience as an important component of that investment is to be considered by all of our countries which are in risk areas. And as in St. Kitts and Nevis, I said, we every year we keep our fingers crossed that we don't have a hurricane. We have no control over that. So the control which we are building in to our development is to build better, to build stronger, to ensure in the case of flooding, because last year we had flash floods which created significant millions of dollars of damage. We now have to look at how we construct our infrastructure, our roads. We must look at providing adequate drainage and runoff systems. We must ensure that, we do, in terms of our agricultural lands, because of the topography, that we provide adequate terracing, things like that, to ensure we don't lose every time we get an unusual shower of rain that we lose the topsoil, because then that sets our farmers back. I think this really has to be the way of the future, the way of the now, really, because, you know, we have to ensure that now, as we look at our agricultural development, as we look at our tourism development, as we look at establishing private housing, that we take into consideration how do we construct, how do we plan, so that in the event of a hurricane or earthquake, that we're able to resist. And that resilience factor is critical to any planning and investment which we do from here on going.
Mahmoud, when you look at Addis this summer, what does success look like there for your country, for Bangladesh?
Thank you. Most of the vulnerable countries try to have adaptation program with their own resources, you know, and unfortunately, the countries which are worst victim of the climatic change or disaster did not receive sufficient fund from the developed world or developed partners even. And it is oftenly said that money was placed by the developed world or the developing partners, but the most of the countries could not release this fund following the procedures and other technical formalities. My proposal is that in this case, if it is really true, why don't you ease the formalities, or why don't you give the technical support or technical know-how to the peoples of those countries so that they can release this fund easily and they can spend this fund for the development for adaptation programs. And for Addis, my proposal would be that we want to have a predictable flow of enhanced resources for development. We will include development of the adaptation programs and mitigation programs, an easy mode of procedure to release ODA and climate fund, and an integrated financing framework combining efforts of all stakeholders, including the national government, development partners, and the civil society and business community as a whole. Thank you.
Rachel, I'll give you 1 minute just for a final closing thought on what we've heard today and on what lies ahead.
Well, I think that the reality is that there is finance flowing. I mean, obviously there's development finance flowing and there is climate finance flowing. But that given the role that climate's playing in exacerbating, altering the frequency and the intensity of disasters, a large part of the funding that needs to come, is keyed up to the future of our climate financing, development financing, as well as then the ownership at the domestic level about building resilience. And it's true that in the climate finance flows that are already there, the vast majority of the financing is going into mitigation and is going into mitigation in larger economies. And so there really is a very significant problem in the least developed countries, and then including small island developing states, as well as the sort of highly vulnerable countries, that there isn't sufficient adaptation finance that can go into the innovation and can be catalytic in terms of spurring resilience efforts. And that is something that we're going to have to grapple with. In Paris in December, we're going to be negotiating sort of the framework under which we're all going to operate from 2020 on. We cannot take a hiatus in solving this problem between now and 2020. The need to really stimulate adaptation finance flows and to stimulate the investment in resilience from all sources, private and public, domestic and international, needs to be a priority. We've got a number of ideas for LDCs and small island states. I think that we need to be coming forward with even more. I couldn't agree with you more. We need to take away the transaction cost. I think that's a commitment that we've made. But this is today's business, and it's urgent, and we need to continue a dialogue to make sure we get it right.
You know, I think today we've heard that this is not easy. You know, as Rachel started out the whole discussion talking about Sendai and the long, hard work to achieve what was achieved there. And it makes me think of a story about a gentleman actually from Japan who I think should be a model for all of us as we move forward here. And his name is Toshitaka Katada, and he was a professor in the town of Kamaishi. And that's in the Iwate prefecture. And when he moved to the town, he was stunned to learn that in the schools, they really weren't instructing the students on the danger of earthquakes, on tsunamis and how deadly they could be. The schools, the people in the town, the government, everyone felt they were safe because they had an enormous seawall. They didn't really need to do any more. Prevention, drills, why bother? We don't have time. And in the schools, the teachers, well, we have really other things we need to be focusing on, math, writing, reading, arithmetic. But he wouldn't give up. He said, no, this is important. I really think we need to teach the children more. We need to drill. We need to practice. We have to make them understand maybe those walls won't be enough. In March 2011, when the Great East Japan earthquake hit and the tsunami followed, in that city, all 3,000 students who had drilled and practiced, who were in school that day, they evacuated, and every single child survived. And that was because of one man who wouldn't quit. So I want him, I think, to be our model. We can't give up either. I think we've got to make sure that the talk of Sendai turns into the action of Addis. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Please join us upstairs for the reception. Thank you.